Cole Younger, Jesse James gang, Bigfoot, and my great-great-grandfather. This story features a Bigfoot hiding spot that few have probably considered. If this video gives you a new place to check for Sasquatch that you have never thought about before, how about surprising me back by hitting the subscribe and like? It really helps a small timer like me. Please also note, if I weren't so old, I'd be keeping some of this info to myself in hopes of my finding proof of existence. But at 62, I'm just hoping at this point to see their existence proven before I leave this world. Here's what I have for you today. My family has roots in western Missouri. My grandfather's grandfather, or great-grandfather, I can never remember how it goes exactly, but anyway, that relative I descended from owned what they called back then, at least in our parts, a candy store, also known as a bakery. Actually, he owned two candy stores. His first was located in St. Joseph, Missouri. The second candy store was opened in Lawrence, Kansas. He had the Cole Younger and Jesse James gang stay inside his candy stores more than once. As you might imagine, a bakery was a pretty good place to hide out since it had good food ready to eat, and on top of that, who would have thought to look inside a bakery? Once he even spent the night with the Younger James gang when he was en route from the candy store in Lawrence, Kansas to the other one in St. Joe, Missouri. He happened to pass through a stretch where, out of nowhere, one of the gang grabbed the reins of his horse, he drove a buggy, and they proceeded to tell him that the Pinkertons were everywhere up ahead, and they were shooting first and then asking questions. It was not safe for him to go forward, and they wouldn't let him go. As such, that was the one time when great-grandfather spent the night in Jesse and Cole's house, so to speak. On a side note, you may have noticed I made a point to mention the Younger gang first. Apparently, that is a point which was handed down in the family. No explanation ever came with it, but it was a point which was handed down. I think my family was closer with the Youngers than the Jameses, not that it makes a lot of difference. So it was a while after that all happened when this story takes place, but I told it to you because it is interesting and because it sort of sets the aura for this story. The same great-great-grandfather once lived in a house which overlooked the Big Blue River, which pours into I believe it's the Kansas River right before the Kansas pours into the Missouri River, and the Kaw River joins the party shortly before all these other rivers merge, although I might have some of that backwards. I can confidently say that they all end up being the Missouri River before it finally gives way to becoming part of the Mississippi River, but that doesn't happen until the two rivers merge somewhere further into the middle of the state of Missouri. There are other rivers and streams, such as Brush Creek, which run through the middle of the plaza and then downtown, which I'm certain also feed into the Missouri along that stretch, but those are some of the bigger rivers. So my grandfather said his grandfather told him he was sitting on the front porch of the house, which faced the Big Blue River, and he could see there was a mob of men who were chasing what he first thought was a man, but then he realized that would have to be one really big man based on the size difference between the one being chased and the ones doing the chasing. The fact that the one out in front was basically running straight toward where grandfather was watching from his viewpoint on the front porch of their house only exaggerated how much bigger the chased one was than the ones doing the chasing. The mob looked like they were carrying rifles and shotguns, which, as many are aware, that God created man, but Sam Colt made them all equal. Well, these men in the mob had all met Sam Colt and had found his approach to life to be very agreeable. Across a field of something fairly tall, probably corn, the grandfather was able to watch the pursuit play out. The way the corn was moving, it was quite clear that whoever was being chased was headed straight for the riverbank, and if the river was crossed, then it would lead a path right up to where grandfather's porch. He watched to see what would happen. The grandfather fully expected to see a man, possibly a man wearing inmate clothes, to come bolting out of the corn and go diving into the river water, which he then expected to see the man either climb out the bank on his side of the river or to swim for it, which would be a really dumb move because it would be sure to get him caught. When an 8-foot, maybe taller, bipedal hairy beast came bolting out of the tall corn, jumping over the edge of the river, the grandfather fully expected to see water splash in a huge way as the beast crashed into the river. But instead, the creature, which had uncanny long arms, used those arms to reach out as its body was coming over the riverbank edge, and it managed to grab a hold of the root system of the big maple that was growing there along the side of the river. Momentum carried the agile beast so it was able to swing itself down and then up under the lip of the river bank. To better help you understand, there are places along some rivers which have trees that grow along the river bank, and the roots of such trees, like the big water maples, will help to form the edge of the river and prevent the soil from being just eroded away by the force of the water. These roots, when combined with the soil along the river's edge, can actually create a cavity up underneath the lip of the river, which can easily accommodate a full-sized man 2 or 3 times over. Well, the grandfather watched as the beast disappeared, leaving him wondering every bit as much as the mob of men hunting the creature as to where it went. The men chasing it had been close enough to perhaps not see it directly do its flip over the riverbank edge, but they were still close enough right behind it to know that the beast had to have jumped over the river's edge and then down into the water, where to everyone's surprise they did not see it climb the opposite bank and continue its race to get away, which meant it had to be in the water. A very bad move. The hunters fanned out along the river's edge until they were certain they had enough river covered that there was no way that creature could have held its breath and went that far. They waited for the creature to come up for air. Even if it had the ability to go 5 minutes or longer before coming up for air, they had men far enough down the river they would see it when it came up. Only the problem was it did not ever come up for air. Even as further proof the beast could not have held its breath and made it past the gauntlet of men which were positioned along the river, was the fact that eventually it came to a dam which would have required the beast to climb out and over the dam to get past it. But this did not happen. The men kept some in key positions along the river, while the rest broke into a search and destroy party, which worked all along the river bank back towards where the beast had jumped over the embankment. It was nearly the end of the day by the time the mob of hunters decided to give up on finding the big hairy creature. The men had even sent someone over to speak to the grandfather since they saw him sitting on the front porch, and he told them what he saw. It had come bolting out of the corn and then was down over the edge of the river bank, and that he expected to see the splash of water, even though he could not see the water from the angle his house sat. Had the creature have splashed into the river, he fully expected to be able to see the splash, but none ever came. The grandfather wondered aloud if that perhaps the hairy creature did not possess some unknown ability or skill that allowed it to enter a body of water without it splashing. Apparently it also had the skill to hold its breath a long time, or perhaps breathe underwater, since it had to have went somewhere after jumping down into the river basin. The only thing down there is water. Anyways, the hunters eventually gave up and left the area. Just before the sun left our side of the planet, the grandfather observed something big and hairy climb out of the river on his side, and it walked along parallel to the river until the darkness and the distance combined to achieve a disappearing act which any magician would have been envious. The next day, the grandfather went down to the river and discovered the big empty cavity which was there just under the river's lip. He would actually use that knowledge at a time later in his life to avoid his own group of hunters, but that is a story which the family would just as soon see stay buried with the grandfather, so I won't be offering it today. In any case, it was a handy bit of knowledge to know back in those days. It should perhaps be noted that such a hiding spot is only good as long as the river is flowing below the height of the river's edge or lip that makes the edge. If a river is full to the top, then there is no place to hide in its cavities. Perhaps it should also be noted that the Big Blue River down by where it joins the Missouri River is fair-sized. I cannot speak on how accommodating a smaller riverbank might be in terms of how big the cavity under its lip might be. Well, that is the story. The Bigfoot was seen hiding in a spot that I bet most would never have thought to look. It also shows just how clever and capable they are, and how they could literally be right under our noses and we would still have a hard time spotting them. Thanks for visiting. Please subscribe. It is appreciated. Godspeed to all.